Hi guys, in today's Andromeda episode we're going to be taking a little bit of a look at the background of the series, how it came to be in the first place, and look at its first two-part premiere episode. Now, the most difficult thing for me when coming up with these videos was deciding really how to go about and do it, because I could really go through every individual episode of the series in detail, talking about how the series progressed and analyzing them, but that really defeats the purpose, I think, of what I want to accomplish with these videos. There are three main things that I really want to do here. One is express why I love this series despite its flaws, and the second thing is to introduce the series to people who've never heard of it before or you've just never seen it, and maybe get you a little bit interested in checking it out. And the last thing, the third thing here, would be to reach out to those people who gave Andromeda a shot to begin with, decided they didn't like it, and maybe convince you to go back and give it a second chance by learning a little bit about what happened behind the scenes and why things went bad and what is still good about the series maybe after you stopped watching it. So in doing that, I want to keep these episodes a little bit brief. I do, again, I'm going to warn you there will be spoilers as I do a little bit of an overview of each season, but at the same time I'm going to keep them minimal as far as the details. A little bit of a spoiler about some of the overall big arching plot points, but as far as individual episodes, try and keep that to a minimum, but give you a little bit of a feel of how things progress, the flow of the series over the years, and add in some information about what happened behind the scenes to really make you understand about how that evolution occurred as the series went on. Now, to begin with, Andromeda is a concept from Gene Roddenberry's writings. It's actually a fusion of two concepts. In the late 90s, a lot of old Gene Roddenberry writings in various stages of completion were brought up as possible new TV series. After the original Star Trek went off the air and before the reruns started and it became popular, Gene Roddenberry actually kind of wanted to move on from Star Trek. He's like, alright, I did that, I'm done, I'm moving on to other things. Kind of like Joss Whedon now with Firefly, something he remembers very fondly and is very proud of, but it's done and he wants to move on. But he kept being dragged back into Star Trek, so Gene Roddenberry had all these unfinished writings when he died that were different pitches for new TV shows, along the lines of something like Earth Final Conflict that came out in the, again, late 90s around this time period. And two of those were Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda and Gene Roddenberry's Starship. And both were eventually pitched as possible TV series, and what became the Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda we know today is actually a fusion of Andromeda and Gene Roddenberry's Starship. Those both came together into a single idea, and then were further changed by its head writer, Robert Hewitt Wolfe. And the idea really solidified around the end of 1999. Originally, the concept of Andromeda was always about time travel, always about a person out of place, out of time. The whole concept was around this character who was an anachronism, a character who was first 500 years in the future, I believe, then they went down to 300 years in the future that he was traveling, and eventually when it fused with the Starship idea, it became a Starship captain and integrated a lot of Star Trek and Federation ideas into that time-traveling story and made it about someone who was a Starship captain rather than a scientist who was lost in time. And then in 1999, at the end of that period, the show got its showrunner, Robert Hewitt Wolfe. And it's important to know a little bit about his background to understand the clash in ideas that he had as far as the story of the series as it go through time versus what Tribune, the company who's creating the series, had in mind. He was someone who was known for writing a lot of scripts for different sci-fi series, but he was more importantly known for being very active in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. He was one of the lead writers for that series, had a lot of experience within the Star Trek universe, but within a lot of big open story arcs rather than just the show of the week type stuff. So being a writer from Deep Space Nine, that is the path he wanted to initially take Andromeda as far as its story structure, to have a more ensemble cast, everyone with fairly equal opportunity and participation in the different stories, and a large overarching story through each season with a few handful of individual episodes that are more story of the week, but they all had something to add to that main overarching plot. Now that was at odds with Tribune, but that didn't really come out till later. Then what was sort of the thing that propelled the series into the limelight was the addition of Kevin Sorbo as the main character, Dylan Hunt, who went through several name changes. But why that was a big deal, by the end of the 90s, Kevin Sorbo was considered to be one of the most bankable stars for TV, because Hercules: The Legendary Journeys was such a huge hit, and it created so many different spin-off series that he was really known as an actor who, you make him the main star of your TV series, it's going to capture an audience and it's going to be successful. And how he got tied to Andromeda was the last season of Hercules, season 6, was only half a season. Before that, roughly about 2.5 years before the completion of Hercules: Legendary Journeys and the start of Andromeda, Kevin Sorbo suffered a stroke. And that's why you'll notice that he is definitely a lot skinnier in the final seasons of Hercules, because he couldn't work out quite as heavy and was having a lot of health problems. And during that time period, there was an issue with by the time he came back, he felt that Hercules was being treated as a secondary show and getting unfair treatment, because the creator of both Hercules and Xena was, of course, at the time in a relationship with Lucy Lawless, who played Xena. So that show started getting preferential treatment. And with the partial absence of Kevin Sorbo in one of the series of Hercules, it also led Xena to be the bigger show, even though it was a spin-off. And eventually Xena started getting all the best writers and started getting more money per episode, and they would try out a creature in Hercules, and if audiences didn't like it, they didn't use that again. If audiences did like it, they would move it to Xena, but with a better costume and multiples. And there's even something that Kevin Sorbo claims, that he was approached and asked, who do you think are the best writers for Hercules? Who do you think are the people who have made some of the best episodes? And everyone he named was then completely and permanently taken off Hercules and put on the permanent staff for Xena. So there's a lot of animosity there, and Kevin Sorbo wanted out. But then this opportunity came up, and it was the right time, so he was able to beat Dylan Hunt and move on to Andromeda. So you had a really big launch. Andromeda did very well its first season in the ratings, particularly in the first half of the first season, did exceptionally well. Eventually it would fall off, but at this point it was actually competing with Xena in the ratings and doing fairly well. Now we come to the premiere episode that, again, did fairly well. Unlike Star Trek, which takes place a few hundred years in the future, Andromeda takes place a few thousand years in the future. And unlike Star Trek, where Earth is seen as this center of what was in the Federation in Star Trek, Earth is kind of this backwater planet in Andromeda, a forgotten ancient relic that was the home of humanity, but really has no stance in the system's Commonwealth, which is the Federation of the Andromeda series. And their version of Starfleet would be the High Guard. So a lot of elements from Star Trek, but very different in its presentation. You have Andromeda's ship with this very sleek design that actually does a better job in some ways than Star Trek about understanding and utilizing the idea that space really has no up and down, left and right. It really is this big three-dimensional, 360-degree thing, so the Andromeda is able to do flips and things in combat, and there really is no difference between up and down, and it makes a little more sense, and in the beginning that was utilized fairly well in a lot of these combat sequences. And the very first episode starts off with Captain Dylan Hunt in this very futuristic society as the captain of the flagship, the Andromeda Ascendant of the High Guard. One of the greatest things about the Commonwealth would also be its downfall. It is a society that was massive and seen as too big to fail, and a society that had not seen real war in centuries. One of the main humanoid races within that Commonwealth were the Nietzscheans. They're a very interesting race that could very easily have slipped into being their version of Klingons, but instead they were a warrior race that adopted a different philosophy. They were Nietzscheans, and they adopted the philosophies of Friedrich Nietzsche, particularly looking at his theories and talking about the Übermensch, this perfect being. They are very much a survivalist society and very fascinating to get into. And they're one example, and probably the best example, of how deep and rich the history and the structure of this universe is that Robert Hubert Wolff helped create out of the writings of Gene Roddenberry. It really showed in the first episode that there were a lot of different races, and there was a lot of history and structure here. It did a very good job of showing that there was a lot to work off of in this series. One of these Nietzscheans is Harris Rade, who is the second in command to Dylan Hunt and also his best friend, who is about to be the best man at his upcoming wedding. After the opening sequence of a combat drill that really is an excuse to give you a little bit of an idea of the layout and the structure and the capabilities of the Andromeda, while experiencing some back and forth banter between Dylan and Rade that gives you some background on the characters, a little bit of an idea of their personalities and the differences between humans in this world and Nietzscheans. They arrive on the bridge and intercept a distress signal. The Nietzscheans had been plotting a coup for many years, and it seemed that it was an impossible scenario for one race inside this commonwealth of many different races to possibly take on and even win, but they're fighting from the inside, and they're a race where many of their people, in fact the majority of their people, are involved in either the High Guard or somewhere within the military structure. Some of them are even captains of the ship, a lot of them were working in security, a lot of them were working as second in command. They were in a lot of different positions where they could very easily sabotage and cause chaos, and for them every day is a battle, as Rade says, versus the Commonwealth, who has seen so much peace that they're ill-prepared for fighting on a massive scale, particularly from the inside out. The Nietzscheans as a people came to this conclusion that they needed to overtake the Commonwealth because they thought the Commonwealth had become weak, they thought it had become complacent, and they needed someone to sort of gain control that was more powerful and more of a protector of the galaxy. And the final decision that was kind of like the last straw to make the Nietzscheans reach this conclusion came when the Commonwealth made peace and signed a treaty with a race called the Magog, whereas the Nietzscheans were unified in the philosophy, in the idea that no, they needed to wipe out the Magog once and for all. Peace was not the option with this race. Now, the Magog are a very violent race that will invade a place and just kill anyone that they cannot breed with, and they breed solely through rape. They impregnate the individual, could be male or female, whatever, with their Magog eggs, and eventually those Magog eggs grow and eat their way out of the host, killing their mother unit, their parental unit, their incubation unit, and that is how they reproduce, and they just kind of spread like a plague. They have no other purpose but to keep breeding and eating, and they're just a plague, and they killed billions of people. And the Nietzscheans wanted revenge. The Nietzscheans thought that this was, as far as survival, the only logical option was to wipe out these people that there was no dealing with. But the Commonwealth made peace with this race. Gaheris Rade, Dylan Hunt's second-in-command and best friend, is a part of this Nietzschean rebellion. And after Dylan Hunt orders the ship to be evacuated as they don't stand a chance against the hundreds of ships coming for them, everyone leaves except Dylan Hunt and his pilot. But Gaheris Rade comes onto the bridge, kills the pilot, and begins fighting, trying to kill Dylan Hunt and take control of the Andromeda.
Rotate ship to cover.
Commander?
During this fight, Dylan Hunt does end up killing Gaheris, but the ship gets sucked into a black hole. Now, while the Andromeda Ascendant gets slowly sucked into the event horizon of the black hole, it becomes frozen in time, and Dylan Hunt and the entire Andromeda Ascendant are stuck there for 300 years before the salvage ship Eureka Maru comes to salvage this legendary ship that is considered almost a myth at that point. The crew of the Eureka Maru is under the employ of Gerentex, who is searching for this giant prize, the Andromeda Ascendant, and knows the secret about it, that it contains nova bombs, which are kind of like, you think of them as atom bombs, but of the extreme variety where they can destroy an entire solar system, easily take out a planet. Anyone in this time period, 300 years later, that would gain a hold of a ship like the Andromeda Ascendant, its technology, and this lost technology of nova bombs, would be able to rule their own corner of the galaxy, and of course then it's worth a ton of money. Now, in the 300 years that Dylan Hunt and the Andromeda Ascendant have been stuck in the black hole, the Commonwealth fell during its own civil war, during the coup of the Nietzscheans. But when the Nietzscheans came into power, the fatal flaw of Nietzschean society took over. The Nietzscheans are separated into many different clans and then have very small, very compact, very loyal family groups. And they ended up not congealing and not becoming a single entity. Instead, when they took power, all these different groups started fighting amongst themselves and created chaos. So there was no giant ruling structure. Instead, the system's commonwealth was completely crumbled. And even worse, the race that was even above humans as far as being in command of the Commonwealth and being the guiding force, who had the home world that was the center of the entire Commonwealth structure, completely cut itself off from the slipstream. The little tendrils in subspace that connected all the different planets and are the Andromeda's way of traveling at warp speed, you could call it. Something I'll explain a little bit later talking about Season 1 as to go into more detail about how this works. So now you had no central organized structure, the Commonwealth itself crumbled, and the people that replaced it were now just infighting, and technology was lost, the galaxy crumbled, different pieces that were all connected have now separated, and basically it's very much like the fall of Rome, the aftermath, and going into the Dark Ages, lots of lost technologies, and things were just in a bad place. In fact, one thing that is noted when the Urikamaru then is able to pull the Andromeda out of the event horizon of the black hole and board, Dylan Hunt wakes up from his slumber and starts to realize that he is lost in time. 300 years have passed and they cannot contact the Commonwealth. And they start noticing little things, different races working together that possibly wouldn't normally when looking at the Urikamaru's crew. And noticing that Harper is suffering from an illness that could possibly kill him, that in Dylan Hunt's time could be easily cured by any doctor with a little hypo spray thing. Two of the biggest surprises for the AI of the Andromeda and Dylan Hunt as they examine Urikamaru's crew and decide how they're going to combat these intruders is Rev Bem, a Magog who's actually working with these people. Rev Bem is an interesting character because he was born in the normal fashion of a Magog. He was born on the planet called Kingfisher, but for some reason he ended up having more of a conscience and wants to make up for the natural sins of his birth and ended up becoming a Buddhist-like character following the Way, which is a very interesting philosophy we'll get into later. Another one was Transgemini, this purple creature who, in the massive database of the Andromeda Ascendant, she often refers to her brain as being the size of a small planet. She's never encountered this race before and has no idea what she is. So without going into any further detail, the first two episodes serve the purpose of setting up the show's premise and introducing the whole main cast. Basically, Dylan Hunt, a man lost in time with the most powerful ship in the galaxy, armed with its mighty AI, joined with the ragtag group of the Urikamaru and the Nietzschean mercenary Tiranasazi, are setting off on the completely and seemingly impossible mission of re-establishing the system's commonwealth and rebuilding a civilized and orderly society. There are a couple things this two-part premiere does really, really well, and a couple things that are kind of stumbling blocks that are forgivable as a premiere. And if you look at a lot of pilots for TV shows, there are always little issues and a few character sort of tweaks and redesigns after the premiere. You notice a big difference in a lot of shows between the first episode and even the second. Sometimes the coloring will look a little bit different, little things like that as things are fixed. And what the show does really well, though, it sets up this universe that gives you a feeling that even though you're introduced to a lot of history and culture and these different societies in the beginning, it's very surface, but gives you the impression that there's so much more underneath and there's so much richness and complexity that could be explored in future episodes. It really sets it up to be something that is the quality of Star Trek as far as the enormity of the universe that is ready to explore, and it gives you hope for episodes to come. It also does a great job of introducing all the characters without really forcing and shoving anyone in your face. There is a logical reason why these characters came together, and there's a logical reason why they're staying together. And through the conflict, it shows the different personalities of the characters and gives you just enough of a look into them and their backstory, just enough to get you interested, to make you want to learn more without giving too much away in its opening scenes. It also shows off the Andromeda fairly well, and then the special effects, different things like that. It does a really good job with a lot of the action scenes, and the drama's done pretty well. It shows that there's a very good balance of humor, and it sets up the idea that this will be an ensemble show where, yes, Dylan Hunt is the main character, but he's only going to be given slightly more attention than the other characters. At least that is the initial intent shown by the beginning of Season 1. Some things the show doesn't do too well. Every once in a while, the acting will feel a little hokey or a little forced, and the writing isn't quite perfect. But honestly, that is more in the first part of this two-part premiere rather than the second part. Once more characters are introduced, it feels like it comes together, it gels better. I think the part that could have used more work was definitely the opening sequence before Dylan Hunt was trapped in time. And it's kind of sad that that's the first thing you see is the worst part of this two-part premiere. But really, once you get past that first 10-15 minutes or so, it starts to get better and better as it goes along. Another thing that the show didn't do quite right and sadly never really fixed in future episodes was some of the alien designs look really bad. A lot of them, if you look in the beginning, some of them, even like the pilot Dawn, and just a lot of them look very fake. It's nice that they went the route of trying to put in a lot more physical effects and real makeup and costume work, but it really wasn't up to the quality of many other Gene Roddenberry productions, whether he was involved or not, particularly Star Trek, which is kind of the king of that area. But a lot of those creature designs just don't quite work. They kind of pull you out a little bit because they feel so fake, and that is a problem, like I said, that will plague the series as time moves on. But it's something that is still, you can overlook and forgive, and it's not really a show all about, at least in the beginning, all about just the special effects and the makeup. It's more about this universe and story that's building up. And the most important effect, though, is the ship itself, is the Andromeda. It's like the Enterprise. That is the most important thing. It's another character. And this series is taken a step further because that character actually has personality and an avatar, a physical voice, and AI rather, than just being a ship. So that is done really well, and the Andromeda Ascendant is wonderfully designed, and that part is done exceptionally well. One thing as far as its design that even the first time watching it, I kind of thought was a little stupid, was the pilot's seat, the big comfy chair thing. And that does get fixed later on, but throughout the beginning of this first season, it is kind of a ridiculous looking part of the set. But overall, this premiere really does set up the series and give it a very interesting premise, give it, just a lot of great ideas. Watching it for the first time, it gave me a lot of hope for the structure of this series and its future. In the next video, we'll be taking a look at Season 1, and I'll do just an overview, probably about the same length video as this, of the rest of the series, give you more of an idea what was going on behind the scenes, and what was going on with the different characters, and talk a little bit about some standout episodes, and some of the hit-or-miss ones throughout that season. I hope you enjoyed my introduction to Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda, and I'll see you next time.
The long night has come. The system's commonwealth, the greatest civilization in history, has fallen. But now, one ship, one crew have vowed to drive back the night and rekindle the light of civilization. On the starship Andromeda, hope lives again.